Hi there, and welcome to Israel Explained. Netanyahu gave a speech on Capitol Hill edition. You may notice that my surroundings have changed somewhat, and that's because I am in my father's basement in Queens. Some of you have known that my father's not doing so well health-wise, but now he's doing a lot better. So thank you for everyone who cared enough to ask and for all the well-wishers. But the good news for those of you who think that I work out of my mother's basement is that now you're pretty close to the truth because I'm working out of my father's basement, or at least I will be until I head back home to Hollywood. So there you go. Let's talk about the speech and whether it achieved the goals that Netanyahu set out to achieve. So first, one of the biggest stories about this speech is who Netanyahu didn't manage to attract to the speech, who didn't attend. Most notably Kamala Harris, who says she had a previous engagement for her sorority, but a lot of people think that she was just looking for an excuse to get out of it. Nancy Pelosi very clearly said that she's boycotting the speech and also released a pretty critical statement afterwards. There were also a lot of demonstrators outside, 5,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators to be exact, who gathered to protest the speech and called Netanyahu a war criminal. Rashida Tlaib was one of the people calling him a war criminal, but she did it from inside. She attended the speech and she held up a paddle saying that Netanyahu is a war criminal, agreeing with the protesters. I also heard that they burned an American flag out there, which will probably not add to their popularity with middle America. Now, as for the speech itself, it was very well planned and it was very positive in its tone, more positive in its tone than I would expect. It made a lot out of stressing the commonalities between Israel and the United States, and it also tried to be balanced in the way that it handled the two rival presidents, current president Biden and past president, current contender for the elections, President Trump. That was one of the things that we, of course, watched the most because usually when you go out of your way to thank two presidents, they will both be appreciative. But we know that while Biden will appreciate the thanks, we're assuming, Trump tends to take any kind of commendation for his rival as a personal slight. The relationship between Netanyahu and Trump is very tense just because Netanyahu congratulated Biden when he won the elections. And of course, we know that Trump believes the elections were rigged. He also doesn't appreciate the fact that Netanyahu has said several times that he thanks Biden for all the arms and money that the U.S. has sent during the war. So there's a lot of tension there. And I was wondering if maybe he would attack Biden in this speech for two reasons. Reason number one, for the base back home in Israel. He's been trying to blame Biden in various ways for setbacks in the war, and this could have been an opportunity to do that, kind of like the way he went after President Obama in his 2015 speech. And of course, going after Biden would win him points with Trump, but he did not do that. Instead, Netanyahu complimented both presidents, each one of them three times. He congratulated Biden first, which is significant. And I think the most heartfelt thing that he thanked anyone for was when he talked about Biden's visit to Israel. That's what I saw he got a little bit more emotional about. He said it's a visit no one will ever forget when Biden flew over not long after October 7th to show support. He also thanked Trump for moving the embassy. He thanked Trump for the Abraham Accords. So he was trying to be balanced, but I'm not sure that Trump is going to appreciate how he did that. There were several rhetorical methods that Netanyahu used in this speech. One was to show complete and total identification between Israel and the United States. It almost blurred the interests that the countries don't share, which are considerable, and focused on what they do share, which is a wise thing to do, of course. And also the things that draw Israel and the United States together seem to be under threat. The American commitment to democracy, abroad, to its alliances, threatened by both the extreme left and by the isolationist right. So that was a wise thing to do. Another thing he did was he used a lot of people that he brought over to demonstrate certain points. So he brought over war heroes of a very diverse type. One Ethiopian community Israeli soldier, one Bedouin, others who are war heroes who had great tales of heroism. He also brought Noah Argamani, who is arguably the best known hostage, one of the best known hostages at least. She came along. There was an emotional moment with her. That section might have gone on a little bit too long and come at the expense of the speech, but it still highlighted some important points about the hostages who are still in Gaza and about the diversity of Israeli society, which a lot of people are not fully aware of. So it's certainly worth doing. He made a pretty good case defending Israel in general in ways that people who have listened to Netanyahu have heard before. But he talked about how the ICC and ICJ accusations of war crimes, etc., and of starving the population are untrue. He said that Israel had taken precautions to warn civilians before they were bombed. He said that Israel had sent in enough aid, and the problem was that the aid was being stolen rather than Israel was not delivering it. In both cases, overstating the truth, but not lying. Um, he also called the protesters Iran's useful idiots. He said Jews protesting are like chickens for KFC, which a lot of people said was a dumb line, but I have to admit my father laughed quite hard. I think if you're not online, you might not know that joke. So it landed with some people. I've heard it too often, so I didn't laugh. Um, there was one implied criticism of Biden when he said, give us the tools to win faster and we'll finish the job faster. But that's also not an explicit criticism of Biden. After all, it was Congress that was sitting on the aid bill for a very long time and not passing it. And I think that's intentional. You can spread the blame for that around on everyone, and he cannot mention President President Biden. So there was very little daylight between him and Biden, which was surprising. And I think there's two reasons for that. Reason number one is because Biden is dropping out of the race. He doesn't look at his best in terms of age and health. And it feels like kicking a man when he's down. And most Americans at this point would not appreciate that. He's won a lot of points with even people who were criticizing him by stepping down for what he sees as the good of the party and the good of the country. So at least 50% of Americans would resent it if he did that. And even back home, Biden looks weak. He doesn't look like the main enemy. So I'm not sure how much he would gain from doing that. But the other reason is that I think with Kamala Harris entering the race has reached a point of absolute uncertainty. If it really seemed like Trump had the highest odds of winning just a few days ago, now with Harris getting all the money that she did and all the enthusiasm that she did, it's not that she's a clear front runner or anything like that, but the race seems to be up in the air. And Netanyahu didn't want to commit to one side, knowing that he paid a pretty big price for betting on Romney against Obama and having Obama win. So I think those are the two main reasons that he did that. But he also needs to work with Obama and Harris for several more months at the end of the war, and he might need them, not only for the hostage deal, which, by the way, he didn't talk about all that much in his speech, but also for the day after plan, which he actually did mention to everyone's surprise. What he said about the day after was very short and very vague, but he said that he wants Palestinian civil rule in a demilitarized Gaza, where the ultimate security responsibility is for the IDF. What was very interesting is he did not rule out the PA. In Israel, he will often rule out the PA when he talks, like when he gave that interview on Channel 14. But in this case, he did not. And knowing that he's having negotiations go on with Ron Dermer, who's very close to him, negotiating the UAE over the day after, I do wonder if there's some sort of breakthrough there and a possibility that something will happen. As you know, I believe that the day after is the key to winning the entire war. Because winning the war requires removing Hamas from power. Day after plan would mean getting an alternate government in, and I think that is the key to everything. So if there's movement there, that's essential for Israeli strategic outcomes in Gaza. So in final analysis, That speech was very effective, I thought, for American politics. Certainly not going to change the minds of anyone in the extreme left or even the firm left, but moderate liberals, centrists, independents who've looked at what Israel's done in Gaza and have their reservations about it. I think this might have actually helped sway some of those people. It may have mended the fences with some moderate Democrats, although not all that many. And he didn't praise Biden enough, probably, to make the Republicans and MAGA supporters dislike him. Aside from Trump, who takes everything very personally, so in that regard, I think he did well. But he did not address anything that the Israeli audience was looking for. So he didn't give the base the red meat that they wanted by attacking Biden. I've already mentioned that. But he also didn't give the centrists and the left anything they wanted by talking at length about the hostage deal, by taking responsibility for October 7th or anything like that. He just wasn't giving not just the base, the viewers in Israel anything they hadn't heard a million times before. So there are plenty of people who watch this and thinking it was a good speech, but it didn't give them anything they hadn't heard, and it won't move the needle in Israel politically in any direction at all. Okay, so I have some questions from you. It's been a while since I did my last video because of my father's health, but hopefully that will change now. Atari J asks, can you give some background on the Yemen civil war and where you see things going as far as the Houthis are concerned? In addition to their attacks on Israel, they've caused disruption to global trade. Would you expect a forceful response from the US alone or leading a coalition, possibly after the election? Did the US administration pressure the Saudis to halt their war against the Houthis, and if so, was it a mistake? Okay, so background on the war. No expert on Yemen, but I know the basics. Civil war surrounding the Houthis, they're Shiite separatists supported by Iran. They took over quite a bit of territory in Yemen, so Saudi Arabia and the US stepped in, stabilized the situation, helped the Yemeni government keep most of the territory in the country. But the Houthis took over the entire west of the country, which is very unfortunate for the US and Israel because the west of the country borders the Red Sea, and those are crucial shipping lanes. The war there isn't really ongoing in the sense that there aren't offensive to try to change the battle lines. There's exchanges of fire and so on, and there's talks. So unless those talks succeed and the Houthis surrender, which I doubt, the Houthis are going to stay in charge of that area. Now, as for an American attack, the Americans are hoping that when there's a ceasefire in Gaza, the Houthis will stop what they're doing. And that's one of the reasons they're trying to keep it on a low simmer instead of starting a major offensive. But if there isn't a ceasefire and they keep attacking shipping, or there is a ceasefire and they keep attacking shipping, we can expect a bigger U.S. Operation in Yemen, most likely, as you said, after the elections, because right now, during the elections, the U.S. will want to keep it out of the headlines as much as possible. As for the administration pressuring the Saudis to halt their war against the Houthis, there was some of that. But that's not what happened. MBS, leader of Saudi Arabia in practice, has been trying to move towards a rapprochement with the Iranians in order that he can focus on the economic development of his country. He's still allied to the U.S. He's still interested in normalization with Israel under certain conditions, but he doesn't want open hostility with Iran. He wants peace and quiet, and that's the reason he moved towards a resolution in Yemen, not because of U.S. pressure. So it's not really about the U.S. making a mistake. It's about Saudi Arabia changing their policy. We don't know if it's a mistake or not. Right now, it's working for Saudi Arabia, but we don't know in the long term if it won't come back with a vengeance. Other questions. Ben-Ephraim asks, do you think Biden's political weakening is also forcing Hamas to be more desperate to make a deal for fear of a Trump presidency? So this question was asked before Biden withdrew, but it's still relevant. I would say this is not aimed personally at you, Ben. Americans tend to overestimate the importance of their own politics on the Middle East. It's true that everyone in the Middle East is curious and looking at whether Trump or Biden are going to win the elections, but the time horizon for things like this war is much shorter. It'll be a few months before there's elections in the U.S., and it'll be even longer, talking about end of January, before a new administration is in. Both sides, Israel and Hamas, expect this war to be over by then, or I should say, expect a ceasefire by then. They also don't know how Trump will differ from Biden, if at all, in actual policy on the ground. So I don't think anyone is really counting on any of that. Once people know who won the elections, they'll start taking that into account. But that's not a major consideration right now. One of the major reasons is not always that far away. No one knows what Trump is actually going to do. So Hamas is worried about what they're doing right now. The reason that they're weakening is because Israel has been walloping them on the battlefield, and because of the whole Biden-Trump thing and the assassination and all that. So this is where it is linked. No one seems to care about Gaza anymore, and that's very bad for Hamas. Their public opinion stuff, it just isn't in the headlines anymore. And that is one of the reasons they want to end the war. They're not gaining the advantage there that they hoped they would. Poodles Dancing asked, that's a great name. It's assumed that Sinwar is surrounded by hostages to keep him alive. Why didn't Def do the same? I'm assuming Def was not with hostages, but possibly with Gazans to use as shields. So I did talk to someone who knows this stuff in Israeli intelligence, and this is what they told me. They told me that Def, just like Sinwar, usually is in the tunnels and often is around hostages, or at least they think he's often around hostages. But unlike Sinwar, he sometimes comes out. And the reason he sometimes comes out is came out, was because he wanted to keep a connection with the operatives and with what was happening on the ground. Sinwar had become pretty isolated because he doesn't see anyone. He sees like two people. And Dave didn't want that. So Dave would venture out every now and then, take a risk, because he thought it was important. Israel knew that. He seems to have done this before a few times. I don't know how many times, maybe three or four. So they were waiting for the next opportunity, building up intelligence for that, and they struck when that happened. That's because they knew that this was a habit of his. When he went out, he didn't go with shields, he didn't go with hostages, he didn't do anything like that. He went to a shaded grove. He thought it was a safe place. He was wrong because Israel had rebuilt its human intelligence. He wasn't aware of up to what level. Sonny LaBouffe asks, do you think Hamas is a contingency in case their entire senior command is whacked? What might that look like? So yes and no. I mean, Hamas have had their leadership getting whacked for many years, since the mid-90s this happens. Every now and then when things reach a certain simmer point, Israel starts trying to annihilate the entire senior leadership. This is at least the third time they tried to do that. So they have a very clear hierarchy. And underneath every commander, there's a deputy commander. Underneath every deputy commander, there's a few commanders lower than that. So everyone has like a successor that they're grooming in order to go into that position. So that's what they have as a contingency plan. And in most cases, these people are cogs. When they get killed, the person who replaces them has some experience and he can do more or less the same job. Mohammed Deif is an exception. He's not only a symbol, he's very good at planning. He's irreplaceable. You know, every now and then there's someone who's irreplaceable. Like Yishi Ayash, the engineer, who was behind a lot of terror attacks. But most of these people you can replace, and that's what they do. They bring up the deputy. The hierarchy is very rigid there. So in most cases, these assassinations don't matter all that much, with exceptions like that. Okay, so that's the end of Israel Explained for today. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Israel Media at Patreon. Thank you for everyone who has so far. I also have a podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast. Check that out, and I'll see you here the next time something interesting happens, which with the Middle East, it's always very soon.